So, as many of you may have noticed, today, same-sex marriage has been legalized in all 50 states in the U.S. And a lot, or a majority of people seem to be celebrating this, which, in a sense, is good, I guess, in some capacity. However, today, for me and for a lot of people I know, and just generally a lot of trans and gender expansive folk, today is not a day of celebration. Today is a day of pain and violence and erasure. Because I don't think people quite understand how marriage equality has come to be. The people who started this fight and started the gay liberation movement or queer liberation movement, not quite the same thing, but besides the point, the people who really started this movement were trans people of color, specifically trans women of color. And when the fight was started, it was not about marriage or equality or any of this. It was, you are hurting us, you are killing us, you are destroying us. This is unacceptable, and we are going to fight against it. And the people who paved the way for that were trans people of color, trans women of color. And yet, the rights of trans people and the people who have carried this movement on their backs are not being acknowledged or talked about or discussed. And they haven't been historically. Historically speaking, trans people have been stepped on and used in order to gain rights for cisgender queer folk. There is a huge historical there's a word that I'm missing, but that's not the point. This is real. And the people who are dying, the people who are being violated and hurt and detained and sexually assaulted at much, much, much higher rates than anyone else in the community are trans people of color. And again, we are sitting here championing something that is not even equality. Marriage is not equality. Marriage is not a tool to gain equality. And I guess I'll read this to you, which was posted by Darkmatter, about marriage equality and this whole concept of whatever. 1. Violence against queer and trans communities of color is steadily increasing. The majority of this violence comes from the very state that allegedly supports our equality at the hands of the police, prisons, mental health institutions, and ICE. Victories like this Supreme Court ruling are often used to pinkwash the US government and make it seem LGBT friendly, even though it is one of the biggest arbitrators of anti-queer and anti-trans violence at home and abroad. Two, every time there is a symbolic ruling like this, there is a significant backlash. This backlash looks like acts of physical and sexual violence against largely low-income, gender non-conforming people of color who cannot afford privacy and safety. Policy change does not translate into changing hearts and minds. Community organizing does. Stop discussing progress without understanding punishment. Three, what you call a rainbow, we call the racial wealth divide. It is much easier to affirm gay love than it is to call for reparations for colonialism, slavery, and exploitation of labor. As gay marriage gets legalized, the majority of LGBT donors are pulling back their funds to support queer and trans work. This leaves those of us doing racial and economic justice work even more broke and less able to get people out of prisons and into stable housing and jobs. But who needs money for bread when you can eat wedding cake? For marriage equality is an oxymoron. The institution of marriage is an inherently unequal institution. Marriage is a racist, patriarchal system established to allocate basic rights to couples over other forms of relationships. The institution of marriage has and continues to exacerbate the racial wealth divide in this country. Five, we are fighting for more than rights. We are fighting for abolition. This is this is a very different political strategy. We do not want more freedoms. We want to be free from violence. We aren't fighting for equality and love. We are fighting for economic justice and liberation. We aren't fighting for representation. We are fighting for revolution. Um, so I just, on top of all of this, so all of this being said, today is Trans Day of Action. So the irony to me is that on a day where we are supposed to be taking action for trans folk and the violence that we face and the violence and discrimination and the hatred and all of these things that we face, we're supposed to be taking to the streets and fighting against this today. That is what today is about. And yet we're sitting here championing marriage equality that isn't even equality. It's not even doing what you think it is. And we are erasing an entire population of people with this celebration or this championing of this supposedly step forward. This isn't a step anywhere. This isn't a difference. This isn't change. This is the same crap over and over and over again. Literally, today is so symbolic of everything that has occurred within the past since like the 1960s, is that we are constantly fighting for gay rights at the expense of trans rights. Like why is this continuing to occur? And we keep having this conversation over and over and over, and people refuse to listen. Like, the fight isn't about marriage, the fight isn't about love, the fight isn't about equality, the fight is about survival, the fight is about being free from violence, being able to walk down the street and not be afraid that someone is going to murder you simply based on your gender identity, or your sexual orientation or whatever. Like, that is what this fight is about, not about marriage and love and some institutionalized BS. I can't sit here and pretend like this is okay and pretend like this today is not excruciatingly painful and violent and erasive of not only my identity, but thousands and thousands and thousands of other people who carried this movement on their backs and died for this movement and are not being acknowledged. And that is not okay. It's not okay. And I don't really know what else to say. But that's what I'm going to say, I guess.